In the darkness of the streets, those tasked with protecting the public sometimes turn into terrifying criminals, abusing their power and position to commit crimes. These cases not only shock society, but also raise questions about oversight and accountability in law enforcement. The victims, many of whom are vulnerable women, have endured long-term sexual abuse and assault, while the abusers, with power in their hands, continue to inflict harm undetected. This betrayal not only shatters trust in those tasked with protecting, but also opens the debate about police reform and greater oversight. Michael Val, 1975, age 50, Island, New York. Michael Val, born in 1975, is a former police officer with the New York Police Department, NYPD. Before his crimes, Valva had served 17 years in the police force. He is a divorced father of 3 sons, including 8-year-old Thomas Valva, the victim of the case. Valva lives with his girlfriend, Angela Pina, and her 3 daughters. Although he was considered a skilled police officer, Valva's career was ruined by his brutal criminal behavior. Val's actions not only destroyed his family, but also destroyed the trust in those responsible for protecting the community. On a cold winter night in January 2020, a 911 call from Michael Valva shocked everyone. He said that his son, Thomas, had fallen and was unconscious. But what really happened behind those words? Thomas Valva, an 8-year-old boy, was not just the victim of an accident, but the victim of horrific abuse, left in the cold without any help. Thomas' story shocked the community and raised big questions about how a man could turn into such a cruel villain. Michael Valva, a former NYPD officer, was seen by society as a protector of the law. However, when details of his family life were revealed, everyone began to doubt Valva's true character. Living in a house with 3 children, Valva and his girlfriend Angela Pina began a life full of turmoil. Both Valva and Pina engaged in abusive behavior toward their children, especially toward 2 children diagnosed with autism, Thomas and his older brother, Anthony. According to investigative reports, before the incident, Thomas and Anthony lived in an unheated garage without basic needs of a child, such as a bed and blankets. Security camera videos in the house revealed Valva's brutal treatment of his children, especially Thomas. Not only was the boy left out in the cold, but he also suffered terrible punishments from his father. The image of a father who would be so cruel as to abandon his child in the middle of a cold night and then call 911 just to cover up his crime is infuriating. Thomas Valva endured the unimaginable. It was more than just the death of a child. It was an event that deeply shook anyone who heard it. When the authorities got involved and analyzed the evidence, they confirmed that Michael Valva's actions were not random, but a series of cruel acts, motivated by nothing but indifference and hatred. The death of Thomas Valva is more than a family tragedy. It is a warning to society about the abuse of power and responsibility. A man, a former police officer, could abuse his power to harm the innocent children he was supposed to protect. This case is a clear illustration of a painful truth. Not all men in uniform are worthy of the community's trust and respect. After the truth about Michael Valva's actions was revealed, justice came to him. In December 2022, Valva was convicted of second-degree murder and multiple counts of child abuse. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison and could have to serve the rest of his life. This shows that no one, no matter who they are, can escape punishment if they commit crimes. The recognition of justice in this case is not only a comfort to Thomas' family, but also an important lesson for those who disregard the safety and care of children. Communities and authorities must do more to protect the rights of children and bring abusers to light, so that stories like Thomas Valva's do not happen again. The Michael Valva case has unleashed a wave of outrage and grief among those who witnessed this brutality. The abuse of power and the cold-bloodedness of a father not only took the life of an innocent child, but also left an entire community in pain. But while crimes may remain hidden for a time, justice will eventually find its perpetrator. In this case, Michael Valva has paid the price for his actions, and child safety will continue to be a key issue in discussions about protecting children's rights in society. Daniel Holtzclaw, 1986, age 39, State, Oklahoma. Daniel Holtzclaw, born in 1986, is a police officer who served with the Oklahoma City Police Department. Before his arrest and conviction, Holtzclaw had a clean image, described as honest and responsible in his work. However, behind the uniform and the officer's status, Holtzclaw used his power to abuse and sexually assault at least 13 women in his service area. His victims were all vulnerable women, some of whom had criminal records or were using stimulants. Holtzclaw was sentenced to 263 years in prison for these crimes. When Daniel Holtzclaw was hired by the Oklahoma City Police Department, he seemed like a promising police officer, someone who would protect and serve the community. But what happened during Holtzclaw's tenure is a haunting and terrifying story. Taking advantage of his position and power, Holtzclaw became a predator, attacking and abusing many women in the area he was assigned to protect. Holtzclaw's story is not just a personal crime, but a cautionary tale about the abuse of power and the responsibilities of law enforcement. Daniel Holtzclaw, a police officer with a spotless record, became one of the most iconic examples of abuse of power in the police force. As his case began to unfold, the community was shocked and in disbelief that a police officer could be a serial sex offender. Holtzclaw's victims were mostly hazardous women, many with criminal records, some with addiction problems. Holtzclaw uses his power and position to assault his victims, tricking them into false tests, then forcing them to perform sexual acts against their will, often threatening them with arrest or harm if they resist. According to reports, Holtzclaw picked easy victims, those he believed would not come forward. He worked in a predominantly black and minority area, and many of his victims were reluctant to come forward to the police. This makes them Holtzclaw's targets. The case also illustrates the lack of oversight of police officers. When Daniel Holtzclaw's case came to trial, the seriousness of these acts could not be ignored by the community and the legal system. The community cried out for justice, and in December 2015, Holtzclaw was sentenced to 263 years in prison on the 18 counts including sexual assault and criminal abuse of power. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, with no chance of parole. The story of Daniel Holtzclaw is a reminder of the importance of controlling and supervising law enforcement, especially those with power like police. Justice was not only sought for victims, but also an important lesson in protecting the community from abuse of power. Despite being a police officer, Holtzclaw did not escape the punishment his crimes deserved. This case will forever be a milestone in the fight against the crime. Daniel Holtzclaw abused his power to become a serial sex offender, destroying the community's trust in the police force. His actions were not only a personal crime, but also a warning about the dangers posed by those charged with upholding the law. Fortunately, justice was served, and Holtzclaw paid the price for his crimes. This story will forever be an important lesson about oversight, accountability, and justice in the legal system. Bobby Cutts Jar, 1981, age 44, Ohio. Bobby Cutts Jr., born in 1981, is a former police officer in Lake Township, Ohio. Before his crimes, Cutts was a seemingly normal man, a law enforcement officer with a thriving career. However, after killing his girlfriend, Jessie Marie Davis, and her unborn child, Cutts became a feared criminal. At the time, Cutts was in a relationship with Davis, and was the father of the unborn child. After committing the brutal murder, Cutts tried to hide his actions, but eventually the truth about the murder was revealed, and he was sentenced to life in prison. One night in June 2007, a brutal crime occurred in Lake Township, Ohio, when Bobby Cutts Jr., a police officer, murdered his girlfriend, Jessie Marie Davis, and her unborn child. The deaths of mother and child shocked the community, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but also because the perpetrator was someone the community once trusted, a police officer. Although considered a stable career man, Cutts was a cold-blooded criminal who not only ended Davis's life, but also attempted to cover up his crime with a false story. Bobby Cutts Jr. appeared to be a fairly normal person before the incident. As a police officer in Lake Township, Ohio, Cutts was tasked with protecting the community and enforcing the law. However, behind the police uniform was a completely different person. Cutts and Jessie Marie Davis were living together in a tumultuous relationship, and the couple's unborn child was a sign of hope and a future. But just before Davis became pregnant with Cutts' child, their lives were threatened by hidden problems that no one could have predicted. On the night of June 14, 2007, after a heated argument, Cutts killed Davis. During the investigation, authorities discovered that Cutts had tried to create a false story to cover up his actions. He claimed that Davis had committed suicide, but evidence later revealed that this was a lie to protect himself from the crime he had committed. Traces from the crime scene, including traces of blood and cuts, conflicting statements, led police to the horrifying truth about the deaths of Davis and her unborn child. Each victim in this case is not just a human being, but also a symbol of hope and future. Jessie Marie Davis, a young mother, was robbed of her life while she was carrying an innocent child. Her unborn child was also brutally murdered, never having the chance to be born. Bobby Cutts Jr.'s actions were not only a crime against a woman, but also a deprivation of a future, a family that had not yet formed. This case raises questions not only about the instability of relationships, but also about the abuse of power. A police officer, who is responsible for protecting the people, used his authority to cover up a crime. Cutts' actions betrayed the trust that the community had placed in him. What happened next shows that no one, no matter who they are, can escape justice if they commit a crime. When the case went to trial, Bobby Cutts Jr. could not escape the crime he had committed. After months of investigation and trial, Cutts was convicted of first-degree murder, murder during pregnancy, and related charges. In February 2008, Cutts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This recognition of justice was not only a reward for Cutts' brutal actions, but also a powerful reminder that criminals must be held accountable for their actions, no matter who they are. This case is not just the story of a murderer, but also a warning to those in positions of power and responsibility that they should not abuse their power to harm others. The victims in this case are not only those who suffered loss, but also those who fought to find justice for what was lost. The story of Bobby Cutts Jr. is a story of abuse of power and the devastating consequences of domestic violence. Cutts, a police officer, harmed not just one person but an entire family. However, through this case, justice was served, and Cutts paid the price for his actions. This case is also a reminder of the importance of monitoring and controlling police officers who are responsible for protecting and serving the community. Matthew Kenny, 1978, age 47, Mississippi. Matthew Kenny, born in 1978, is a police officer in Oxford, Mississippi, where he served in the police force for many years. Before becoming a criminal, Kenny was known as a law enforcement officer with an upright image, serving the community and enforcing the law. However, Behind the police uniform and reputation of a law enforcement officer, Kenny had an affair with Dominique Clayton, a young woman. When this relationship was discovered and Clayton threatened to reveal the truth, Kenny killed her to silence her and protect his personal image. Kenny was sentenced to life in prison for murder. A police officer, whom the community trusted to protect and enforce the law, turned into a murderer. Matthew Kenny, a police officer in Oxford, Mississippi, shocked everyone when he killed Dominique Clayton, a woman he had been romantically involved with. Why would an officer of justice kill a woman he once loved? This story is not only about abuse of power, but also a tragic love story full of guilt. This case shocked and opened up big questions about betrayal, deception, and crime from those who were supposed to protect. Matthew Kenny was a highly regarded police officer in Oxford, Mississippi, with many years of service in the police force. He took pride in his work, believed in protecting the community, and enforcing the law fairly. However, while carrying out his duty to protect justice, Kenny built a complicated and troubled personal life. Kenny began a romantic relationship with Dominique Clayton, a young woman, even though he was married with children. The relationship lasted for a long time, and even though Kenny knew it was an affair, he continued the relationship. However, when Dominique Clayton began to threaten to expose this affair, Kenny lost control and decided to kill her to protect his personal image and family. On the night of May 19, 2019, Kenny drove to Clayton's house on a rainy night. After an argument broke out, Kenny shot Clayton in the head while she was lying in bed, brutally ending her life. After the crime, Kenny returned to the police station and reported the incident as a murder. But investigators could not help but notice inconsistencies in his testimony. Eventually, the truth was revealed through evidence and witness testimony. The story of Matthew Kenny is not just a criminal case, but also a story of betrayal, deception, and crimes against relationships. Kenny not only harmed Dominique Clayton, but also took the life of a promising woman and destroyed family and community values. His actions not only caused suffering to the victim, but also to his own family, who will have to live with the pain and shame of his criminal actions. Why would a man in power, entrusted with the responsibility of protecting and enforcing the law, act in such a way? Why would Kenny choose to kill to protect a secret, rather than face the truth? These are questions that many people cannot find answers to, but this case once again shows the abuse of power and human weakness when put in stressful situations. Kenny could not escape justice. After a lengthy investigation, Kenny was arrested and convicted of first-degree murder in 2020. Throughout the trial, Kenny's lawyer tried to justify his actions, but could not change the facts. Kenny was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice was served, and Dominique Clayton, although tragically lost, at least received recognition for her life. Although Kenny sought to protect himself and his career by killing, he will have to face the price of this action for the rest of his life. This case is not only a lesson for those who abuse power, but also a warning for those who think they can escape responsibility for their actions. Justice will always find the truth, regardless of who commits the crime. 1975 Matthew Kenny was a soldier in the police force, but could not overcome his own weaknesses. When faced with the truth about his adulterous relationship, he chose the path of sin. Kenny's story is a reminder that no one, even the guardian of the law, can escape punishment when they commit serious crimes. This case ended with the recognition of justice, and one man paid the price for his actions. But for the rest, it leaves a lesson about the abuse of power and the consequences of hiding the truth. Wayne Kusens, 1972, age 53, London. Wayne Kusens, born in 1972, is a former police officer of the Metropolitan Police in London. Before committing the crime, Kusens was known as a police officer with a good record and had served in the police force since 2005. He was a member of the Special Protection Team, responsible for protecting important areas and high-ranking figures. However, behind the uniform and position of power, Kusens committed horrifying crimes. In March 2021, Kusens kidnapped, sexually assaulted and murdered Sarah Everard, a 33-year-old woman, causing a shocking case and sparking a major debate about abuse of power in the police service. Kusens was sentenced to life in prison. A police officer, whom the community trusted to protect and enforce the law, turned out to be a brutal murderer. Wayne Kusens, a member of the Metropolitan Police, committed one of London's most shocking crimes in 2021 when he kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered Sarah Everard. This case is not just a story of a brutal crime, but also a betrayal of society's trust in law enforcement. The question is, how could a police officer become a criminal? Wayne Kusens is a police officer with a history of nearly 15 years in the force. He joined the Metropolitan Police in 2005 and spent many years working in the area and VIP protection team. Although he was highly regarded for his work and was often tasked with protecting sensitive areas, Kusens kept terrifying secrets that no one could have suspected. In March 2021, Kusens abducted Sarah Everard, a 33-year-old woman, while she was walking home from an evening out in London. Kusens, who was on security duty in the area, stopped Sarah under the pretext of not wearing a face mask. After abducting her, Kusens sexually assaulted Sarah before killing her and hiding her body in a deserted area. What is frightening is that Kusens used his power and position to commit this crime. The incident shocked and outraged the community. Police, who were supposed to protect the public, were being made criminals, and it sparked a major debate about abuse of power in the police force. Subsequent investigations revealed shocking information about Kusens, including previous reports of misconduct and complaints of unacceptable behavior throughout his career. The story of Wayne Kusens is not just a story of murder, but a larger tragedy about the loss of trust in law enforcement. Sarah Everard, a young woman returning home, was victimized by someone who used his power and image as a cover for criminal acts. She was not only murdered, but also sexually assaulted before losing her life. This makes the case not just a death, but a serious betrayal of the community. Sarah Everard has become a symbol of the fear and insecurity that many women feel in society, especially when they are confronted by people they should trust, including the police. Kusens' actions have caused a wave of outrage and strong resistance from the community, especially from women who have always lived in fear for their own safety. The case has sparked discussions about police reform, ensuring that criminals, even police officers, face justice. After the case went to trial, Wayne Kusens was sentenced to life in prison for the abduction, sexual assault and murder of Sarah Everard. In September 2021, after a lengthy trial, Kusens pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a lengthy sentence, serving 19 months in prison for charges related to misconduct earlier in his career. Justice has been served, but the pain that Sarah Everard's family has endured cannot be alleviated. Kusens' sentence has created a turning point in protecting women's rights and safety, and has also opened up a broader discussion about the need for police reform. Sarah Everard's story has brought the community to face a harsh reality: abuse of power can come from those we trust the most. However, this case also emphasizes a strong message: no one, no matter who they are, can escape justice if they commit a crime. Wayne Kusens was a police officer whose job was to protect the community, but his betrayal of his profession and his community shocked everyone. Sarah Everard's story is an unforgettable tragedy, and Kusens' case is a reminder of the importance of oversight, reform, and protection of victims of crime involving police officers. Justice has been served, but this story will forever be a great lesson in protecting safety and fairness in society. David Carrick, 1972, age 53, London. David Carrick, born in 1972, is a former Metropolitan Police officer in London, England. Before his arrest, Carrick had served in the police force for more than 20 years, mainly protecting important areas, including protecting officials and parliament buildings. Despite being a high-ranking officer in the protection team, Carrick committed terrible crimes that no one expected. Throughout his career, he abused his power to sexually assault at least 12 women. Carrick was arrested in late 2022 and sentenced to life in prison in 2023 for his crimes. A police officer with more than 2 decades of service, tasked with protecting sensitive areas and officials, became a serial sex offender. David Carrick, a senior member of the Metropolitan Police, used his power and prestige to become a sex abuser. Carrick's story raises big questions about protection, oversight, and accountability for law enforcement. How could someone in such a high position cover up such crimes for more than 2 decades? David Carrick joined the Metropolitan Police in 2001, and throughout his career, he has held important positions in the Sensitive Areas Protection Team. Carrick is considered a professional officer who always completes his duties and has a good record in his work. However, behind the image of a model police officer is a completely different person. During his years in the police, Carrick used his power to force at least 12 women into sexual acts against their will. Carrick uses romantic relationships to control and abuse hazardous women. His victims were mainly women Carrick met through dating apps or in social relationships. He often exerted power and made his victims feel they had no choice but to comply. Carrick's sexual assaults spanned from 2003 to 2020, but victims were unable to report them for fear of retaliation, especially as Carrick was a police officer. Despite numerous reports of inappropriate behavior by Carrick throughout his career, the complaints were not fully investigated, and Carrick continued to work in the police force. This not only shows lax police oversight, but also shows a lack of accountability in handling complaints of abuse of power. Carrick's actions not only deprived victims of their safety, but also caused the community to lose faith in those they should trust to protect them. David Carrick not only harmed his victims, but he also destroyed the trust of an entire community in the police force. When a police officer becomes a criminal, especially in cases of sexual assault, it raises serious questions about oversight, accountability, and transparency in the police force. Carrick abused his power to control defenseless women, forcing them into a vicious cycle of violence with no way out. Carrick's story is not only a case of sexual crime, but also a wake-up call to society about the importance of controlling and supervising police officers. A criminal with such great power was able to abuse his position to harm victims for years without being detected. This not only caused suffering to the victims, but also made discussions about police reform and protecting victims' rights more urgent than ever. After years of investigation and reports from victims, David Carrick was finally arrested in late 2022 and tried in 2023. Throughout the trial, Carrick failed to justify his actions and was sentenced to life in prison for sexual abuse and related crimes. This sentence is not only a punishment for Carrick's actions, but also a powerful message that justice must be served for all, regardless of who the offender is. With this case over, justice has been served for Carrick's victims, but the loss and damage he caused cannot be easily erased. Carrick's victims suffered not only physically, but also psychologically, as they felt they could not stand up to such a powerful abuser. However, By seeking justice and demanding protection, they have helped change the way the legal system and police will handle similar cases in the future. David Carrick was a police officer who the community trusted to protect them, but who turned into a brutal criminal. His story is not only a tragedy for his victims, but also a major warning about abuses of power in the police force. Justice was eventually served, but this case highlights the need for reform and increased oversight in law enforcement. Carrick's actions should not destroy our faith in justice, but it will always be a reminder of the importance of protecting the rights and safety of victims in all circumstances. Nicholas Tartaglion, 1960, age 65, New York. Nicholas Tartaglion, born in 1960, is a former police officer in New York, where he served for many years before being arrested for murder. Before his crimes, Tartaglion was known as a law enforcement officer with a rather mysterious background, and there was no indication that he had any wrongdoing. However, in 2016, Tartaglion was arrested after committing a brutal murder, killing 4 people in a drug-related dispute. After being convicted, Tartaglion was sentenced to 4 life sentences and will never have the chance of parole. A police officer, whom the community trusted to protect and enforce the law, turned into a serial killer. Nicholas Tartaglion, a former New York police officer, committed one of the most brutal murders in recent history, killing 4 people in a drug dispute. The question is, how could a man entrusted with protecting turn into such an unthinkable crime? Nicholas Tartaglion, born and raised in New York, joined the police force in his early years. Before his arrest, he was a regular police officer with a stable job and no criminal record. However, what led Tartaglion to this brutal path of crime? It all started in April 2016, when Tartaglion was involved in a drug-related murder. Tartaglion had teamed up with a criminal group in a drug dispute. After the group's deal was broken, Tartaglion killed 4 people, including 3 men and a woman, all of whom were killed in a fierce gunfight. Tartaglion reportedly used extreme violence to solve his personal and financial problems, and showed no remorse for this brutal act. After the incident, Tartaglion tried to cover up his crimes and cover his tracks. But the truth was eventually revealed when the police conducted a thorough investigation. Tartaglion was later arrested and charged with mass murder. It is worth noting that, despite being a police officer in the past, he abused his power and position to commit these crimes. Tartaglion's actions not only betrayed the community's trust in the police force, but also opened up a discussion about control and supervision of those with power in society. Nicholas Tartaglion is not only a brutal murderer, but also a symbol of abuse of power and corruption in the police force. The victims in this case were not only deprived of their lives, but were also treated as pawns in a bloody game played by a man who had lost all morality and humanity. This murder is not only a criminal act, but also a reflection of the flaws in the legal system and police oversight. Tartaglion's sentence is not only justice for the victims, but also a strong reminder that power cannot be abused, and those who break the law, no matter who they are, must face the consequences. The pain of the victims' families cannot be erased, but at least Tartaglion's life sentence is a small consolation for them. Still, the case also raises important questions about the need for oversight and reform of law enforcement to ensure that no one, even a police officer, can abuse their power with impunity. After the case went to trial, Nicholas Tartaglion was sentenced to 4 life sentences for murder. His crimes included mass murder, the murder of a group of criminals in a drug dispute, and many other crimes. In October 2017, Tartaglion was convicted and formally sentenced for his brutal crimes. His actions were not just personal revenge, but also an act of breaking the basic principles of justice and protecting the community. Despite his conviction, the truth of Tartaglion's actions continues to raise major questions about the oversight of police officers and the justice system. This case has left the community heartbroken and forced to face a frightening reality. Not everyone in uniform can be trusted, and no one is exempt from justice, regardless of who they are. The story of Nicholas Tartaglion is a reminder of the dangers inherent in the abuse of power. A man entrusted to protect could turn into a terrible criminal who not only took the lives of 4 people, but also destroyed faith in the police and the legal system. Although the verdict has been reached, the case will always serve as an important lesson in oversight and accountability for those who enforce the law. Justice has been served, but the story of Tartaglion will continue to make us reflect on what can happen when power goes unchecked. These cases are not only personal tragedies, but also powerful reminders of the abuse of power and responsibility in the police force. They highlight the importance of oversight and reform of the law enforcement system to ensure that those entrusted with protecting the community do not turn to crime. While justice has been served, the pain and trauma endured by the victims will always be part of the story, and we must continue to fight for a fairer and safer society.